Rich Lowry is the editor of National Review, but he is also the host of two podcasts. Not one, but two podcasts. One is The Editors, which I listen to whenever it comes out. The other is the McCarthy Report, which should be produced more often. Rich, welcome. How are you?
Good, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good, except that my grandson, because of the nefarious ways of MLB.com, has become a Yankees fan. And so I talk about because MLB features the Yankees and Aaron Judge and Juan Soto just enraptured him. So I'm now taunting him mercilessly. And I told McCarthy when he was on last week, the next time I saw you, I would blame you for this development. No one should be a Yankees fan who doesn't live in New York, right?
Best franchise in sport. I grew up a Yankee fan in Arlington, Virginia. My dad was from New York, so he raised me that way. So it is a junior circuit at the moment. The Dodgers and the Mets look dominant, but we'll see. You know,
the Guardians season. Almost got you, friend. We're going to get you this year. Let me go. Rich, we got a lot to cover.
I definitely wanted Josh Naylor. I love that guy.
Oh, he's gone. Bo Naylor is still there. We have half the Naylor brothers, but he's gone. Rich, I want to cover California's Chernobyl, Hegseth, the hostage deal, the incredibly shrinking and vanishing Jack Smith, and Joe Biden's presidency. So it's a lot to do. Let's start with California's Chernobyl. Do you think anyone will resign?
No. They may end up firing the fire chief, but because there's a blame game going on, obviously, between her and the mayor and the rest of the city government. But I don't think so. I don't think, Hugh, we don't live in a time where people resign for poor performance. I will say this has been progressivism's bleakest winter. Losing to Donald Trump, the turn against DEI we've seen in corporations across America, losing Meta, which they in effect had control of the last 4 years or perhaps longer, and then this debacle in the most representative blue state, implicating a lot of the irrational priorities and incompetent governance is really horrible. It's hard to imagine a worse 4 or 5 months for them, but it's what's happened.
It's stacked incompetence in California, Rich. We've got a couple of refugees living with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I. Their house did not burn down. It used to be a White House. I think it's orange now, saved by very, very brave firefighters on very steep slopes, and they're working around the clock, and the winds are gusting above 70 miles an hour as we speak in some of the passes here in California. So it's going to be a long night. I'm not mad at the fire department. I'm mad at the people who didn't clear the coastal sage scrub. And I want to ask you, because you're a well-read guy, have you ever heard of the Endangered Habitats League?
I don't think I have.
How about the Center for Biological Diversity?
It doesn't sound good, but I haven't.
That one was profiled in the New Yorker. I thought maybe that might get through. How about the Spirit of the Sage Council?
No, also does not sound good.
Sea and Sage Audubon?
No.
Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy? All these also groups are environmental wacko groups that try and stop the clearing of coastal sage scrub and try and, quote, protect endangered species like the California gnatcatcher, the Stevens kangaroo rat, vernal pool fairy shrimp. I know all this because I practiced law for 37 years, a land use lawyer. I know exactly who's responsible. It's the wacky environmentalists. Do you think anything will change?
Maybe at the margins, but I mean, California is really committed to this style of governance and to these interest groups. And, you know, I'm a conservationist when it comes to megafauna, right? Like blue whales. Yeah, let's save them. They're amazing creatures. But the Delta smelt, which despite all the water policies in service of the Delta smelt's pretty much gone anyway. And all these little rodents and things no one cares about to stop us from doing things necessary to prevent a cataclysm is crazy. And by the way, also, Hugh, even their own worldview doesn't make sense. So they say climate change means that we're going to face these unstoppable conflagrations. They'll be worse than ever. And what we're going to do is subsidize windmills and chase people in electric cars 20 or 30 years ago, but we're not going to do all the things necessary to stop the fires. You think the first priority, fires are going to be worse than ever, is well, just clear the brush. Make sure, build more reservoir. Make sure you're doing the kind of planning you need to do. And by the way, Ron DeSantis, if he had been mayor or been governor, As soon as those warnings had gone out a week or so ago about this potentially catastrophic wind situation, he would have had a spreadsheet. Which hydrant is where? Are they all operative? What water tankers can we pre-position? Where are the firefighters going to pre-position? Are the reservoirs filled? What's the worst case? And how are we going to plan? How are we going to plan for that? And none of that happened.
Rich, when I quit the Washington Post, I didn't cancel my subscription, but I did yesterday morning when I read a story that attempted to say the Pacific Palisades fire is probably, they're very seriously likely to have originated on New Year's Eve with fireworks. And they have this elaborate theory about the Pacific Palisades fire. Whether or not it's true, they don't mention any of the things I just mentioned to you. If they mention the San Ynez Reservoir being dry, they didn't say for how long or why, which is an EPA rule about covering reservoirs, which I don't know why it exists. It's absolute malpractice when it comes to journalism, when it comes to these fires, and it's going to get worse. Let me move on to Hegseth. Exit question. You always put the exit question at the end after you've talked about it on the editors. I put it at the start. Will he get confirmed?
Yes, he will. And he helped his cause today. I think it was, you're a lawyer, so you know how you prepare someone for a deposition. Don't argue if you don't have to. Don't answer the question if you don't have to. Don't accept any premises. And that's the way he treated these Democrats. They constantly wanted to force them into these yes-no questions that would produce embarrassing clips. He just didn't answer. He didn't play the game. He was calm, cool. Sometimes he just sat there stone-faced and just didn't say anything. And it drove them crazy. And I think it was a self-discrediting performance on a lot of their parts. They were so shrill, pounding the tables, waving their arms. So to the extent that there wasn't already a lot of sympathy for Pete Hegseth among Republicans, this would have increased it. So I think he did his job.
What did you make of Tim Kaine, Hillary Clinton's running mate, BFF, as Megyn Kelly said, of Bill Clinton, delving into the infidelities, well documented, of Pete Hegseth?
I thought it was a McCarthyite performance in certain respects, because you listen to Kaine, you're like, okay, what does he have on him? What does he know that we don't? Because all these questions had an insinuation to them. Obviously, we know about the incident. That's not an insinuation, but he wanted him to say it. So he produced that embarrassing clip. And I'm a polemicist. I like answering questions and mixing it up. But if Pete had gone there, it would have produced embarrassing clips. So the standard is, did he do anything that lost him a Republican vote in the Senate today? No, absolutely not. Did he do anything that's going to drive an a negative media narrative the next couple of days? No. So just by those standards alone, it was a success.
I thought, what was impressive about it to me, Rich, is I think he actually proved he will be an assist with the recruiting crisis. I've been telling everyone they're bringing in a very smart guy as the deputy. He's going to run the building and acquisition. It needs reform. They brought in Elbridge Colby, who may be the smartest guy in China and the United States, to be the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Pete's the recruitment poster. And I say Pete because I've interviewed him before. What do you think of that assessment?
Yeah, I think the worry you have, right, is this is an enormous administrative managerial task, and is he up to it? But the answer to that is he has a lot of effective deputies under him, and he's going to be the symbol of a new way of doing things, right? Younger, lower rank, warfighter within the last decade or so, and someone you can be attracted to if you're a young recruit. So the guys you want to sign up for the military, they're not interested in social justice seminars, right? They do that at the community college. They're interested in the adventure and the fight.
They're going to like Pete Hegseth, their SecDef. I'm going to come back with Rich Lowry after the break. Back with Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, host of The Editors, a great podcast, host of The McCarthy Report, a great podcast. The alternative media is taking apart old media because of podcasts like these two. Rich, Jack Smith dropped a report. Have you read it?
No, I'm not going to read it either.
You think anyone's going to read it?
No. I assume some of the journalists who have written stories about it at least skimmed through it. But this is the most litigated event in all senses in recent American history. We all know what happened. I think it was disgraceful and blameworthy. I don't think, though, President Trump committed any federal crimes. And we had the January 6th committee going on and on about it. We've had tons of media coverage. We had the indictment. So maybe you do a report when you need to explain why you haven't charged someone. Like Robert Hur, we need to know because Biden was guilty of these offenses. So why aren't you going to charge him? Well, he explained why he wasn't going to charge him. So that made sense. But this is just another desperate act of warfare, lawfare, as he's going out the door.
Well, I'm sure that everyone except the Steelers fans are acquainted with Sisyphus and the myth of Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill endlessly. The Democrats are Sisyphus, and the rock is Donald Trump, and they're never going to get him to the top of their hill. They just can't get him.
Yeah. If you had said that you got these 90-something charges a year ago or whatever it is, and he's pretty much going to negotiate his way through all of it without consequence. Yeah, he's convicted in Manhattan, and that matters, and it bothers him, and it should. But he had this ridiculous sentence of no sentence, and he won. And Jack Smith is going to go away, and every other case is going to go away. It's amazing, just example of Trump's resilience. And I've asked him about this. Maybe you have too on air. Just most people, you get 90 charges, you're not able to sleep at night. You're a wreck, right? You feel weak and embattled. And he has the exact opposite attitude. Whatever the problem is, I'm going to find a way around it or through it. And that was the case here.
I mentioned earlier, I was a lawyer for 27 years. All big developers who put their names on buildings share in common resiliency and an absolute I can do this attitude. Sometimes it fails. He had a few bankruptcies along the way and joint ventures and limited partnership. But if you have that resiliency, it does serve, and it drives the Democrats crazy that they can't stop a man that they think isn't fit to be part of the political class, but in fact he owns them. Let me ask you about Donald Trump. Let me take a break, Rich. We'll come back and we'll talk about Joe Biden's presidency on the other side. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Rich Lowry, editor of National View, host of the podcast, The Editors, which you ought to like and subscribe to, and also host of the McCarthy Report, which Rich and Andy ought to put out more often. But what am I? I'm just a radio talk guy. I'll tell you, it's Andy's problem, I know. Let me ask you, the hostage deal, it's an exit question. Do you think it'll get done?
I kind of think it will. Ever since Trump said the hell to pay comment, I just thought that this would get done one way or the other, because the risk of finding out whether he's serious about that or what he means by it, if he actually starts implementing, I think is too high. So I think there will be a deal.
Do you think the Iranians fear Donald Trump in a way that they haven't feared Joe Biden at all?
Oh, absolutely. Hugh, it's not even a close call, right? I think the Soleimani hit was one of the great acts of deterrent in the last 20 or 30 years in terms of the potential risk of doing it, which wasn't high. It's not a major war, and the effect it had in the region. Everyone with American blood on their hands after that event didn't sleep nearly as easily afterwards, and they'd much rather have Joe Biden, but he's out the door.
So let's talk about the out the door Joe Biden. This has been a ridiculous week. I feel bad for him because it's a desperate sort of thing. Do you have any analogous episodes in American history come to mind where a very lame duck, 6 days left president is running around telling everyone how great a president he was?
I think everyone wants to do that right at the end, right? And Bill Clinton also did these monuments right at the end to kind of boost his legacy. What's uniquely pathetic about this is just his state, unfortunately, his physical and mental state, where he's shuffling out the door in a way we haven't seen from any president in the modern era. And it just, Jimmy Carter, I wasn't a fan of his presidency, but he learned things as he went along, right? At the end, he said, I got the Soviet Union wrong. We need to increase defense spending. We're going to deregulate. In fact, he set some of these really important things in motion, but no awareness on the part of Joe Biden of how badly he's screwed this up. And he still grotesquely misstates his own legacy just yesterday or today, I don't know which, when he said that border crossings went down as soon as he came
Byron
in.
York brought that up too. That really did ring a lot of bells that, oh my goodness, this man is not only physically infirm, he's mentally lost it. Rich, the bookends are the Afghanistan debacle and the California Chernobyl. Do you think Joe Biden is the worst president of your lifetime?
I think it has, despite what I said about Jimmy Carter at the end, I think that the Soviet Union representing an existential threat and being on the march everywhere, coupled with the economic debacle, right? With the inflation in the stratosphere, the interest rates, gas lines, all that I think puts Jimmy Carter at the top of the list. But we've never had a more pathetic president than Joe Biden.
I'm going to check back with you in a couple of years because there are some long tail impacts of the Biden presidency, particularly with the millions of people who cross the border without
No doubt.
permission. There are long tail effects of the Biden presidency, which will haunt us for a long time, and in sea construction and all this other stuff. Let me close by asking about what you expect from Donald Trump in term 2. Are you an optimist that big things are coming? Or do you think it's going to be sort of a return? We really didn't have a first Trump term because it was crippled by Brennan, Comey, and Clapper at the beginning by the ambush. But what do you think about term 2?
I'm very optimistic on the border. I think crossings will go to zero. Then they'll tick up again. He'll have to reinstitute these policies, which I think he'll do. Very optimistic about energy, where we're going to have the pedal to the metal. A little worried about tariffs, and I hope they go to reciprocity or something that isn't as sweeping as he sometimes has talked about, and optimistic about the new image of American strength around the world. And who knows, Hugh, maybe even a little optimistic about getting Greenland. Who knows? But I think
I'm
the first
all
2
in
years
on Greenland. Rich, do you remember that the Scottish referendum of independence, 2014, all the left was for it. Let them vote. Let them vote. Have you heard any leftists come out and say, let the Greenlanders vote on whether they want to leave Denmark or not?
No, it's the one instance where they're with the colonial settlers, right? They're
Yes.
with the Danes rather than with the Greenlanders. So we'll see. That'll be the play. You get an independence, and then you're like, well, it could be even more comfortable with you to come in our warm embrace. But I think at the very least, on this and the Panama Canal, he'll get a better deal. And this is a classic instance. He moves the Overton window by scaring the other side or creating an extreme scenario, and then all of a sudden, just a deal that favors us more than would otherwise begins to look much more reasonable.
I have a theory on the Panama Canal. I'm going to talk to Alex Gray, who is the chief of staff to Robert O'Brien at the National Security Council. What do you think Trump is doing on the Panama Canal?
I think he's working the Panamanians. I don't think we're going to get it back, but it's a legitimate concern that this Hong Kong company has control of those ports on either side, which wouldn't have been a concern 20 years ago, right? When Hong Kong was independent. It's not anymore. And the president down there is pro-American, right? We should be happy that this guy won an election. He's talked about the Darien Gap and closing it down. So I think he's working him, rattling his cage with a view to getting him to act on the Darien Gap and getting a better deal on the canal.
That's it. It's the Chi-Coms. He's talking about the Chinese port facilities at both ends of the canal. I guess there are many, many other facilities as well. And I go back. Do you remember George W. Bush? I love W. I think he's the greatest man of character that we've had in my lifetime as president. Just a wonderful human being. But he wanted to propose the ports deal to allow the Chi-Coms to run ports in America. And I just blew my ears out over that. Do you remember that deal?
I did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we opposed it as well.
Yeah, and so I think it's all about the Chinese Communist Party being in Peru and Namibia and Panama, and Trump will be on the march. I don't know if John Phelan, who's the Navy Secretary, is going to have the swing he needs. Do you think we will rebuild the fleet?
Not as much as we need to, I think, just because we're resource constrained. But this is a huge national need. And we're blessed by being a continental nation, but also basically an island nation facing 2 oceans. And it's a huge aspect of our national strength, having a strong Navy. So I'm hoping they build as much as they can. But this is an aspect of our defense industrial base that really needs to be revitalized. If you just look at how long it takes to repair subs, it's shocking and what the backlog is. So we need to be recruiting welders and all sorts of these other guys that work with their hands to get all this stuff moving much more quickly.
Well said, Rich Lowry. I hope that every day Donald Trump calls up John Phelan and says, what have you done for my Navy today? How big is it today? Because it's Theodore Roosevelt land if he does. Rich Lowry of National Review, host of The Editors, host of the McCarthy Report. Thank you, my friend.